Good afternoon, and welcome to the online meeting, Trump's Coup and How to Fight It, sponsored by the Socialist Equality Party and the World Socialist website. We are holding this meeting under conditions of extraordinary political and social upheaval. Just yesterday, in over 2,000 cities and towns throughout the United States, millions of people took to the streets in what by some measures is the largest mass demonstrations in American history to protest Trump's fascistic attack on immigrants and his efforts to establish a presidential dictatorship. These demonstrations, held the same day as Trump's poorly attended military parade in Washington, D.C., gave the answer of workers and young people throughout the country. The American people don't want dictatorship. The development of opposition raises critical questions of history, of program, of politics. Where did this government come from? What are the social forces underlying the assault on democratic rights? What is the role of different political tendencies? And what is the social force that can put a stop to what is happening? These and other issues will be the subject of discussion over the next hour and a half. We welcome the questions from those listening. You can submit your questions and comments online, the best way using the comment field at where you're watching this at wsws.org or where you are watching on social media. My name is Joseph Kishore. I'm the National Secretary of the Socialist Equality Party in the United States, and I will be co-moderating this event along with Johannes Stern, the WSWS editor in Germany, and a leading member of the Socialistische Gleichheitspartei. Johannes?
Thank you, Joseph. I would also like to welcome you all to this critical online event. The developments in the US are of international significance. Similar developments are taking place across the globe. The ruling elites in every major capitalist country are lurching to the right, are militarizing societies in order to wage war, and are turning to authoritarian forms of rule as they push through this reactionary agenda and escalate their assault on the working class. It is a fact that the establishment of dictatorship in the United States will sound the death knell for democratic rights everywhere. That's why there must be a global response. The fight against dictatorship and war is necessarily an international struggle. It must be rooted in the working class, and it requires a fight against capitalism and for socialism. These questions and political tasks will be the subject of today's discussion. Joining us as the main panelists are David North. David is the chairman of the International Editorial Board of the World Socialist website and national chairman of the Socialist Equality Party in the United States. His political activity in the international Trotskyist movement spans more than 50 years. North has authored numerous books, critical Marxist books, including The Crisis of American Democracy, A Quarter Century of War, The US Drive for Global Hegemony, The Russian Revolution and the Unfinished 20th Century, The Heritage We Defend, The Frankfurt School, Postmodernism and the Politics of the Pseudo-Left, a Marxist Critique, and Leon Trotsky and the Struggle for Socialism in the 21st Century. And most recently, and that's of course very relevant, The Logic of Zionism, From Nationalist Myth to the Gaza Genocide. All of these books are available at Mehring Books, and we will make links and possibilities to get these books available during this meeting. We will have Tom Carter. He is a legal expert and writer for the World Socialist website who lives in Los Angeles, the center of Trump's conspiracies over the past week. Carter's work for the WSWS focuses on the political and legal dimensions of the crisis of American capitalism. He recently delivered a report to the 8th National Congress of the SEP titled The Twilight of American Democracy, 1991 to 2024. We have also Tom Ackerman. Tom is a professor of history at King's College in Wilkes-Barre in Pennsylvania. His book, New Immigrants and the Radicalization of American Labor between 1914 and 1924, examines the crucial role played by immigrant workers in the great class battles of the early 20th century. Ackerman has written extensively for the World Socialist website and is co-editor, together with David North, of the New York Times 1619 project, A Racialist Falsification of History. He conducted a series of widely read interviews with preeminent historians of the American Revolution and Civil War, for example, with Gordon Wood, James Oakes, and James McPherson. And we also have Will Lehman as a panelist. Will is a rank-and-file auto worker at Mack Trucks in Macungie, Pennsylvania, and a leading representative of the International Workers Alliance of rank-and-file committees. In 2022, and I think a lot of listeners and readers of the World Socialist website will be familiar with this, Will ran as a socialist candidate for the presidency of the United Auto Workers on the basis of a socialist program to abolish the union bureaucracy and transfer power to the rank and file through the establishment of a network of independent, democratically controlled factory committees. As Comrade Joseph said, the purpose of our discussion will be to analyze clearly and soberly the political situation in the United States, uncover the root causes, and discuss the strategy for millions of workers, not only in the US, but also internationally and throughout the world, how to fight the turn of the ruling class to fascism and war. But before we get to the events of yesterday in the United States and throughout the past week, I like to ask David one question on the recent escalation or beginning of the Israeli attack on Iran. Israel has launched a series of military strikes on Iran. They have assassinated top leaders of the Iranian military, nuclear scientists, and this is, of course, part of a broader regional war in the Middle East. David, how do you appraise the situation and what are the implications of this development?
Well, first of all, I think it's important that at this point, these events, these eruptions of imperialist violence should not be viewed as isolated, separate episodes, but rather part of, in fact, an unfolding and escalating Third World War. This is not something which will happen. It is happening. And in fact, the conflict between the Israeli attack on Iran is a continuation of its war in Gaza. I mean, wading in the blood of the Palestinian people, it is now conducting what is an all-out war against Iran, and depending on how it develops, could also see ultimately the use of nuclear weapons. This is a war that, like the war in Gaza, was approved and instigated with the support of the United States and all the major imperialist powers. I think it's striking just in terms of the outlook and attitudes of the governments which are in power today. The initiation of the war in Iran with a series of homicidal attacks. I mean, one has the feeling one's watching a mafia movie. I mean, among those who were murdered a few days ago was a man who was scheduled to enter into negotiations proposed by the United States. I mean, it has the character of a mafia movie. You set up a meeting and you kill the people on the way to the meeting. This is the morality and the character of imperialist politics today. As far as the Israeli government is concerned, one has the impression that it is led by homicidal maniacs who have lost all control of themselves. They have embarked upon a course of action now which is ultimately catastrophic. They have initiated a war against a country with 91 million people. The Israeli state is continuing to radicalize the population of the entire Middle East, Central Asia. Before this latest episode began, Israel already was the most hated country in the world. It is viewed as an uncontrolled instigator of violence. And of course, it is not acting on its own. Everybody knows that this war would not take place without the approval of the United States. And it is very possible, and certainly this is what the Israelis want, this could escalate into a full-scale conflict between the United States and Iran. The previous wars initiated in that region by the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan ended in disaster, and there's no reason to believe that this will be any different. So we are in a situation which is immensely dangerous. The ruling elites are, if I can use a phrase used by Trotsky, on the eve of World War II, tobogganing toward catastrophe. Nothing can stop this except the mass movement of the working class within the United States and on an international scale. I mean, war, the policies of imperialism must be stopped before they culminate in a nuclear holocaust.
David, we've made the point, as this is perhaps a follow-up question, although also transitioning to the situation in the United States. We've made the point in relationship to the genocide in Gaza that it expresses the criminality of imperialism in the most barbaric form. And now you have, as you note, the expansion to a broader war throughout the Middle East. And of course, you have criminality abroad and you have criminality at home, a government which is operating in defiance of all legality, asserting unlimited powers of the president, asserting, in fact, dictatorial powers. But before going into more the character, perhaps, of this government, or perhaps you may want to comment on it as well, I wonder if you could speak to the objective situation of the developments over the past day, or since the other side of the process, that is the massive eruption of opposition within the United States in these protests yesterday.
Well, they're clearly profoundly related. Yesterday we saw a largely spontaneous eruption of mass opposition by the American people. The overwhelming, that it was a demonstration of working people, of youth, in opposition to the obviously dictatorial, authoritarian aspirations of the Trump government. I mean, if you look at the photographs, and I hope some of them will be displayed in the course of this meeting, city after city saw massive assemblies of people inspired by the slogan, "No Kings." And I think that's particularly important in as much as it demonstrates how deeply democratic traditions, which arise from a history of two great democratic wars, which are fundamental to the founding of this country, live in the consciousness of masses of people. This is a country which was founded on the basis of the first great anti-colonial revolution. With all the problems and all the contradictions of the American Revolution, it set into motion a second revolution between 1861 and 1865, which abolished slavery and gave birth to, in fact, a global movement of the working class. It laid the foundations for the emergence of a new form of social struggle, the struggles of the working class. And I think it demonstrates very clearly and powerfully that those who denigrate these traditions, who have spent much of their time, and I'm talking here of middle-class pseudo-left politics, which over the past 5 years has been devoted to denigrating the American Revolution, the Civil War, denouncing these great events as reactionary, how distant they are from the feelings of broad masses of people. But there's great cause for optimism. If Trump and his gangsters believe that they're just going to impose a dictatorship in the United States, I think they should take a look at the demonstration that took place yesterday and have another good think. But this is the beginning. And of course, demonstrations require political orientation. And it's still, that remains the great challenge. That is to impart to this massive sentiment of opposition a clear political perspective, a socialist perspective, and one which connects the fight in defense of democracy to the struggle against capitalism, which is the real cause of the drive toward dictatorship, the threat of fascism, and of course, the eruption of global war.
I think actually we have some of the pictures. Can we show those of the demonstrations yesterday? Tens of thousands in Los Angeles. I saw one account of 1 million in Boston. I saw an account of something on the order of 11 million people protesting throughout the country. Of course, it's difficult to measure just by the sheer number of the demonstrations. I'd like to ask some of the other panelists to weigh in on this as well. I think one of the very significant aspects of the demonstrations yesterday was their broad character. In many industrial towns, very significant demonstrations, 10,000 in Allentown, Pennsylvania, 5,000 in nearby Easton. Tom, you were at the demonstration. I was asked actually for Tom and Will, you were at the demonstrations yesterday. Could you speak about what you saw there, what the reaction, the mood, the sentiment, and the ideas that were being expressed, and your thoughts on their significance?
Hey, go ahead, Will.
You can go first.
Tom, go ahead first.
Okay. I agree very much with the point that David made before. The thing that really struck me at these demonstrations was the by far the most common sign, placards that protesters were holding. And these were homemade signs, referenced the American Revolution, referenced King George, 1776, the Declaration of Independence. And so I think it underlines the point that David made about these democratic traditions living on and being revived, intersecting now with this particular crisis. I think it also, as David noted, it vindicates the position the WSWS took in opposition to the 1619 project, which came out in 2019, which was an attack on the American Revolution and the Civil War, which argued that these were reactionary, essentially counter-revolutionary events. I think that future historians will look back and they'll find it curious that the main organ of the main media outlet of American liberalism concentrated its fire on defaming the democratic traditions of the country, even while the fascist threat from Trump and his supporters was gaining strength. So that these demonstrations have taken place under the slogan "No Kings," and that so many demonstrators are appealing to the American Revolution. I think that this is very important, especially in the context of the coming anniversary, the 250th anniversary of the founding of the American Republic, and in the context of Trump's really vicious attack on on constitutionalism, on the most basic democratic rights. If what's happening under Trump is not tyranny, there's no such thing as tyranny.
Thank you, Tom. And Will, perhaps you could pick up on some of the points Tom was just making, and also and your own sort of views of the significance of the demonstrations, but also perhaps address the question of how workers see Trump, their own experiences. It is often sort of, sort of a certain, the workers are behind, which is false, behind Trump. But if you perhaps speak to that and how you see the development and the consciousness and understanding of workers.
Sure. So just to add to the points on the protests yesterday, Tom and I went, along with a few other writers from the World Socialist website, to intervene to provide a political perspective that protesting, while important, was not enough, and that something more needs to be done, that a fight needs to be waged, and specifically turning to the social force in society that can wage that fight, that produces all the profits, that moves all the products, whether it's the docks or the rail workers or the factories or the warehouses or the teachers responsible for educating children, the nurses that are overwhelmed with work, and the recent attacks on immigrants who are all working class. I'm sure many have seen videos of immigrants being arrested and detained by ICE, all working class. So we were intervening to provide a political perspective, a way to fight back, and a social force to turn to that needs a political perspective of its own to lead an independent movement that can see the changes, bring about the changes we want to see in society. And just to add about how workers are reacting, what's left go far too often is the Democrats' role in the coming to power of Trump. I know not by the website, of course, but just that they demobilized their own base. They vowed to continue the genocide in Gaza. They vowed to continue the war in Ukraine, and it demobilized their own base. Workers are fed up with war. They're fed up with America intervening militarily all over the world, and that's all the Democrats have to offer them. And it's not that the Republicans are going to end any kind of war. It's that they were fed up with the wars the Democrats were leading and the extreme economic inequality that's increased over the last 4 years with Biden in office. So workers are looking for a different political perspective. They're looking for an independent movement, but they have to understand their own role in society. So workers are definitely receptive to the program that we're bringing to them, but it needs to be led, and that's more so the call to build the Socialist Equality Party and the International Workers Alliance of rank and file committees.
I mentioned at the beginning, or Joe, you want to continue?
No, I was just going to say we'll return to the issue of the IWA-RFC later, which I think is very, very important, and the development of the offensive in the working class and Will's role and views on that. I just wanted to make one point in relationship to the demonstrations. I know we have more photos if we can show them at some time, or you can go to the World Socialist website now, and we have a lead article which is on the protests with photos and interviews from workers and young people all over the world. But it is extraordinary that the way that the media is treating this, which is to try to do its best to bury it. Of course, they had to write, various articles. But on the New York Times, for example, their front page right now, less than 24 hours after what they said is some accounts the largest demonstrations in American history, spontaneous mass outpouring against the government, just five months since it came to power. There's not even an article on the front page of the New York Times right now, and that's a reflection of the nervousness within the corporate media and the Democratic Party. But we'll return to some of these. These are some photos from the World Socialist website that are being shown, which give a sense. But I'd really, this is in Boise, the last one, Idaho. I mean, you have enormous demonstrations in basically every city and town, significant demonstrations in every city and town in the United States. But we'll go back to some of these political issues as well a bit later in this discussion. Go ahead, Johannes.
Yeah, it's actually similar here. There is an element of downplaying the extent of the demonstrations. That was already the case a couple of weeks ago when there was the development of also protests, initial protests against Trump. Obviously, this is a growing movement, and there is an attempt also in the international media, I would say, to downplay this. And the same is, of course, true when one talks about how the whole U.S. situation is presented. It's no one is really spelling out what is taking place, both in terms of what the bourgeoisie is doing with Trump and the coup plot. That this is a coup attempt. So I think from that standpoint, it would also be important also for our international audience to really go a bit more into what's actually happening in the US, and including, of course, in LA itself. I mentioned at the beginning that Tom Carter he himself is in LA. So I think maybe he would best position to go into this a bit more, and what is actually happening, what were the recent what was happening in LA. Is there an insurrection, as Trump claims, which has to be put down? Of course, we were saying on the WSWS, no, the insurrection is coming from the government. They are preparing a coup. So what is the situation? What took place, and how would you? Obviously, one could speak at length, but also for an international audience, I think it's very important to get across what's happening.
Very good. So I'm physically in Los Angeles, and I can speak to some extent from firsthand experience about what has happened here. The city is under what amounts to a military occupation, or a form of that. There are troops in the streets, together with city, state, and county police. There's a curfew that's been imposed on the entire central area of the city from 8 p.m. at night till 6 a.m. in the morning. Every evening, the police clear the streets at 8 p.m. There are helicopters flying overhead that rattle all the windows. And for the past 9 days, can constantly hear the bang of what I believe are the police crowd-controlled grenades. One thing I'll always remember about the past 9 days is the sirens. The police horns and sirens have just been going nonstop 24/7. Los Angeles, of course, is a major urban area, the second largest in the United States. It's home to an estimated 18 million people. It's a massive economy unto itself. If it was its own country, it would have one of the largest GDPs in the world. It is a working class heavily composed of immigrants from around the world. And California, as a state, voted by 3-2 against Trump in the most recent election. So in terms of what happened in LA over the past 9 days, I want to emphasize the premeditated and orchestrated character of what the Trump administration did. The Trump administration targeted the city with raids by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE, which is an agency of the Department of Homeland Security. They sent militarized, heavily armed, masked agents to sweep through the city, targeting immigrants, but targeting immigrants, as Will said, specifically at their workplaces. These raids had a specifically anti-working class character. They targeted garment workers, construction workers, restaurant workers, agricultural workers at their workplaces, and dragged them off in handcuffs, dragged them into vans, in some cases separating them from their children and families. Those raids, as they were designed to do, provoked initially very localized and spontaneous outpourings of indignation and outrage that this was happening. The same day that the raids had taken place, Trump's machinery went into motion. Stephen Miller, declared that Los Angeles was in a state of violent insurrection, which of course is an outrageous world upside down sort of lie. Miller himself is an insurrectionist, having supported Trump's coup in January 2021. But the insurrectionists were accusing everyone else of being insurrectionists. Over the weekend, they sent in the National Guard, ostensibly to protect the ICE agents. The Marines were then sent in to support the National Guard. On Tuesday, Trump rallied the troops at Fort Bragg and said that all of the protesters were animals and enemies, basically attempting to whip the soldiers into a frenzy where they would be potentially deployed to shoot and kill Americans. Tom Homan, actually, above all, directly incited violence against the protesters, said, quote, he said in an NBC News appearance, "If this violence isn't tamped down, someone's going to die, and that's just the cold fact of life." These were all steps prepared in advance. We've described this operation as a coup on the WSWS, and that's what it is. It's no less a coup than January 6, 2021. It makes no difference that Trump is inside the White House as he's carrying out this operation. It's an attempt to overturn and break free of constitutional democratic legal restraints on presidential power and assert dictatorial powers. On Thursday, there was this extraordinary press conference in Los Angeles where Kristi Noem, who's the Secretary of Homeland Security, announced that the military would be occupying Los Angeles to liberate it from the socialists. That was what she said. And the socialists she was referring to was the democratically elected mayor and the governor of the state. And the military, she said, would be liberating the country. Of course, we're familiar with the operations of the American military to liberate places. Iraq was the target of a liberation effort, so was Afghanistan. Basically, the use of that terminology implies that the military is going to be used against Los Angeles to liberate it in much the same way. While that was extraordinary in itself, that press conference also saw the senior senator from California, which is America's most populous state, attempt to ask a question at the press conference where she was announcing this liberation occupation. And her goons rushed the senator and tackled him to the ground. And one might, and I think this is an extremely significant event, violating California as well as federal law. And what was extraordinary about it was not just that it happened, but that Noem ferociously defended it afterwards, saying falsely that the senator had charged the stage or was acting in a threatening manner and had failed to identify himself. All of which is false, and all of which was seen on the video. So, I mean, I think that's the situation in Los Angeles. I think it has to be emphasized that the deployment of soldiers is unprecedented and a historic step, and this was also not a response to anything that was taking place in Los Angeles. This was planned out in advance in order to overturn constitutional and legal limits on presidential power and really set the precedent for the use of the American military against the population. I'll just finally, to explain this point, we've made reference on the website to the Posse Comitatus Act. Think of it like if there's a gun and you're handling it, you never point the barrel of a loaded gun at yourself. It's always pointed away from you. And it's like the army is like the gun. It's an extremely dangerous, lethal, destructive weapon. And the democratic legal principle is that it's never pointed at oneself. This weapon is never used against the American population. That is the democratic consensus and the law that's existed since the end of Reconstruction at the end of the Civil War. Absent a civil war, absent the invasion of the country by a hostile government, the army, the military is never used against the American population. And that's been the case since that period. And Trump is now seeking to overturn that limitation. And he's preparing to use the army against the population. So that's the situation in Los Angeles right now.
Thank you, Tom. I have also seen reports now that active duty Marines have actually detained people in Los Angeles, which is a major step in the utilization of the military within the United States. I'd like to return at some point later to perhaps some of the legal issues related to the assault on democratic rights. But I just wanted to, if we could, explore the question of the character of this government and somewhat more of its historical background more. David, you wrote a book, The Crisis of American Democracy, which consists of a series of analyses of the events of the early part of the 21st century, including the theft of the 2000 elections, 9/11 and its aftermath. During the 2000 elections, which culminated in the Supreme Court decision handing the election to George W. Bush. In the case of Bush v. Gore, you wrote actually in advance of the election that the outcome would indicate to what extent there still existed within the ruling class a constituency for democratic rights, and noted that in the aftermath of the election and the refusal of the Democratic Party to oppose the outcome, that in fact it showed that there did not exist such a constituency. I was hoping you could speak to that analysis now 25 years ago, and how you see it in relationship to the Trump administration, the forces behind it, and also the role of the Democratic Party.
Well, I think, first of all, everything Tom said is very correct. I just would add that there's another element, another well-known saying, never point a gun at anybody. If you're going to point a gun at someone, that those to whom the gun is pointed will assume and should assume that it's going to be used. And the type of language which has been used by the government at the highest levels makes very clear that they are striving to establish violently a dictatorship. Now, if one places this in a broader historical framework, and of course, if there's one advantage of getting older or being old, one has seen a process. Now, if one takes, I think it's important to recognize that what is now taking place in the United States is not some sort of aberration. It is the outcome of a protracted process of democratic decay. I'll try to get to some of the more profound causes of that, but I just want to stress that more than 50 years, a half century has passed since Richard Nixon was removed from office for having been involved in the organization of a conspiracy or of a burglary of Democratic National Headquarters at the Watergate Hotel complex. And that was seen as a major assault on democratic procedure, so grave that it led to Nixon's impeachment and then his forced resignation in August of 1974. 50 years later, a half century later, we have reached a point where political crimes of this government on a scale that dwarfs what Nixon has done produces really no reaction at all within the political establishment. There is no organized opposition from the Democratic Party. The media is going along with it, downplaying it. In fact, I don't think that any major media has said very bluntly that what is taking place is a coup d'etat. And however unsuccessful the parade in Washington was, its intention was clear. Trump brought his troops, and they were conceived as his troops, into Washington, into the Capitol. And its purpose was a demonstration of the power of the military, which he personally controls as his personal instrument, to intimidate and to basically rule by decree. This has gone unchallenged. And in fact, in the media today, there's one comment I read by someone who had previously opposed or had warned about this demonstration, now saying how great it was. But I think the following point is very important to stress when one considers what is taking place as a protracted process. Nixon's conspiracy, which was a conspiracy, took place in the immediate aftermath of the end of the Bretton Woods system, the disengagement from the American dollar, from gold. And that was seen as a turning point in the post-World War II economic history of the United States and of the world. It was, in a certain sense, the first major indication that the United States had entered into a profound economic crisis, a crisis related to its global position as the leader of world capitalism. The last 50 years has seen a continuing and ever greater erosion of the economic position of American capitalism. The level of debt is staggering. we have, in the last half century, the price of gold has increased by a factor of nearly 100. In a sense, the United States is economically bankrupt. And the turn toward violence, the turn toward dictatorship, is entirely bound up with this underlying economic reality. The United States is seeking, the American ruling class is seeking to secure its global position, to maintain its political and geopolitical dominance against all competitors, and particularly against China. But it's doing so under conditions of a massive objective erosion of its economic position. That is why it turns to war and necessarily to dictatorship. The type of destruction, the scale of destruction of living standards, the type of economic dictatorship that must be imposed upon the people, the level of austerity, is not possible democratically. In other words, and I think Comrade Johannes in Germany would be very familiar with this process historically, underlying the dictatorship, the fascist dictatorship of Hitler, was a very similar process. The striving of German imperialism to maintain and expand its global position could not be carried out democratically. Hitler's dictatorship was a manifestation of the striving of German imperialism for hegemony in Europe. In the case of the United States, it's a striving for hegemony in the world. Or as Trotsky said, Germany sought to organize Europe. The United States seeks to organize the world. But to organize the world, it has to destroy the democratic rights of the working class at home. These processes, international and national, are entirely bound up. And the strategic question which arises from this is that the American working class, being forced into struggle, must understand that its own fight depends upon forging the strongest possible unity with its class brothers and sisters throughout the globe. The American working class is being thrust into what is a global struggle against the striving of the American ruling class for global hegemony, something which cannot be achieved without establishing dictatorship within the United States.
Yeah, David, as you raised it, the parallels to the 1930s in Germany, the international historical significance of what is taking place now. I mean, I wanted to return or wanted to raise these issues actually also in the discussion. But as you did now, I just want to bring to the attention of the audience, there was a so-called Veterans Day today held in Germany. So they have now a national holiday in Germany where they commemorate the Bundeswehr. There were meetings held by the government and the military all over the country. This is, of course, at the same weekend where Trump's military parade took place yesterday. So indeed, it's an international process. The militarization of societies, the turn to dictatorship. The Merz government here has already voted for 1 trillion in additional military spending. They're ruling with the SPD, the Social Democrats, now a completely right-wing bourgeois party. They have nothing to do anymore with, of course, their Marxist origins. This is long over. This is a right-wing state party. This just underscores that there is a turn of the bourgeoisie in its entirety to these policies. They're building up a fascist party again in Germany with the AfD to implement these policies. So I want to ask, because that's also often coming up in discussions here. I'm sure it's also coming up with workers' youth in the United States. I mean, yeah, there are these parallels to the 1930s. The bourgeoisie is again turning to fascism. There are also differences, and in terms of, is there a mass fascist movement today? And clearly, these are important questions in correctly understanding the situation and also really developing a perspective to fight. So I would just follow up on that. How do you see that? What are the essential, crucial parallels one has to understand, but also what are the differences? How would you describe? You, of course, have written extensively on the question of the history. You have a book, The Unfinished 20th Century, the Russian Revolution and the Unfinished 20th Century. You made the point that history is not over, or the crucial issues of the 20th century are still have to be grappled with by workers and youth in the 21st century. So this is always important to, to have the correct political historical compass. And so it would be, I think, helpful if you could elaborate on these issues a bit more.
Well, I'll try to speak briefly because I know this is obviously a vast topic, but I just would make the following point. Historically, if you examine the coming to power of fascist regimes, they usually come to power under conditions of demoralization, under conditions in which the working class has lost confidence in itself, in which it sees no way forward. We're not there. I think what is striking about the present period, again, for all the political confusion that exists, and we all know that is there. But what we are witnessing, not just in the United States, but on a world scale, is a process of political radicalization. The next stage of development internationally is going to be a growing mass movement on a global scale. And I want to stress, this is not just of an objective character. I think the working class will come to see itself and identify itself more and more as an international force. Workers will see the struggles which are developing throughout the world as part of an international process. And it's significant that these mass demonstrations are in a direct response to attacks on immigrants. American workers aren't buying it. This is a country of immigrants. This is a country which was formed from immigrants. The great vast majority of this country didn't come over on the Mayflower. They are, in many cases, waves of immigration, generations who fled different forms of oppression. And they are being aroused. They are opposed to the attacks on immigrant workers, and they are being driven into struggle. And I think it's important to recognize the media does everything it can to spread demoralization and to tell everybody that nothing can be done, that everyone's demoralized. That's not the situation. So we're going to see a vast expansion of struggles which will acquire an ever more explicitly anti-capitalist character. I think more and more it will be recognized that there is a profound relationship between the attack on democratic rights and the staggering levels of social inequality. People are talking about oligarchy. People recognize that a relative handful of people control a vast portion of the wealth. And that it will become increasingly clear that such levels of inequality are simply incompatible with democracy. And so as great as the dangers are, it would be a very great mistake not to recognize that within the objective situation, there is a powerful revolutionary impulse, and that is going to come more and more to the fore. And I think part of the desperation of the ruling class, and many of the attacks which are taking place have a sort of preemptive character. On one hand, it might seem absurd for the government to be talking of revolution in Los Angeles, that they have to liberate Los Angeles from socialism. But the fact that they use this term, that they refer to socialism in a country where there is ostensibly a very small socialist movement, indicates their own awareness of the manner in which, and relatively quickly, there can emerge a mass constituency for socialism. That is, for a massive redistribution of wealth. And of course, that's the essence of revolution. The American revolutions were ultimately bound up with the destruction of the slave system, and the mass movement which is emerging within the United States and which announced itself clearly yesterday and throughout the globe is going to take an ever more explicitly anti-capitalist character, the necessity of a vast redistribution of wealth, the basis of which is the expropriation of the oligarchs, is going to acquire a mass basis, mass support. I think that, as we've said in the World Socialist website, people are going to come to the conclusion they simply can't afford the rich. They become much too expensive. The needs of society are incompatible with the whims of the Musks and the Thiels and these other oligarchs whose economic position and control of the means of production and resources is incompatible with the needs of society. One last point, just on this, socialism is about the masses. All the problems of modern society, whether it's the climate, ecology, pandemic, all of the problems we confront are problems which affect the masses. They require a mass solution, and that is why the social revolution emerges as a necessity, and it's not going to be preempted. There will be great, massive struggles. They're on the agenda. The critical question is that these struggles have a perspective, and that's what the Socialist Equality Party, the World Socialist website, and our comrades internationally in the Fourth International Committee of the Fourth International are striving to achieve. This is a mass movement. This is an international movement, which will become a mass movement. And what we are fighting for, and what finds expression in the World Socialist website, is that perspective. I just want to urge all of you who are watching this to go to wsws.org. Make it your business to read the World Socialist website every day, and not only read it, join the fight, become involved. And those of you who participated in these magnificent demonstrations yesterday should take the next step. Now commit yourself politically, become involved, fight for the development of political consciousness in the working class. That's the force that will change the world. That's what you all must turn to.
Thank you, David, for that powerful summation. I think our viewers saw the URL to go to sign up to join the Socialist Equality Party, wsws.org/join. If you're watching this on the World Socialist website right now, I would ask you to do three things. You can see on your right-hand sidebar a link to submit a form to join the SEP. Submit that. Make a donation to the World Socialist website to build this movement. Events like this, which require resources. We did have very powerful intervention in the protests yesterday and are still publishing material from the demonstrations. All of this requires resources. If you're listening now, please make a donation using the form on the page if you're on the WSWS, or you go to wsws.org/donate and make a donation now, or immediately following this event. And finally, there's been reference to several books in the course already of this discussion. Mehring.com. I believe we have a slide. If you could show that, Mehring.com, the Center of Socialist Literature, published by the International Committee of the Fourth International, critical works necessary for understanding the present situation, the crisis of American democracy, the Russian Revolution, and the unfinished 20th century, the logic of Zionism, really central theoretical political works. If you're watching this, having come from the demonstrations or learning about the Socialist Equality Party, that's a critical place to begin really learning about, examining the history of the socialist movement and the fundamental theoretical and political issues which arise in the development of a socialist leadership. I'd like to, and finally, if you're watching this, please, if you have questions, please submit them. We've gotten a few. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. Send in your questions. We will try to answer them in the latter portions of this discussion. I did want to turn to Tom Mackaman again, and then also to Will. Tom, in your book, New Immigrants and the Radicalization of American Labor, you examine the relationship between the assault on immigrants and the attack on the working class, or that's a significant theme, and it's something that you've also written about on the website. I wonder if you could speak to this, the relationship between the assault on democratic rights overall, the assault on the working class, and the assault on immigrants, because I think it is critical. I mean, there's all these efforts to divide the working class, promotion of national divisions by Trump, this vicious assault on the immigrants on the part of the Democratic Party, the promotion of racial politics, gender politics, to divide the working class. But we've insisted that these are fundamentally class questions and that the working class has to oppose the assault on democratic rights as a united force. So I'm wondering if you'd speak to these questions, and then I'll direct a follow-up to Will.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think as Tom referred to earlier, the martial law, effective imposition of martial law in Los Angeles is ostensibly directed or began with an attack on immigrants, and the Trump administration's efforts to erect a police state have begun with this move against immigrants. And of course, it didn't start with Trump. His previous administration, also the Biden administration and the Obama administration, had made the mass incarceration and deportation of immigrants central policies. And now this has taken a really dangerous turn. I mean, the most basic level historically, the attempt to divide workers against each other by the capitalists and their politicians, it's the oldest trick in the book. I mean, it dates back to the 19th century, the baiting of the Irish immigrants in the 1850s, which was a way of submerging the slavery question before the Civil War. And then at the time of World War I, this was the largest strike wave in American history. I deal with this in the book you mentioned. Over 1 million workers striking per year, culminating in the really explosive year of 1919, in which over 4 million workers struck. And at that time, socialism was emerging as a major tendency among American workers. And so the attack on immigrants and the attack on socialism have historically gone hand in hand. In countering that and answering that, I mean, I think that we have to, workers need to understand that an attack on immigrant workers is really an attack. It's the spearhead for an assault on the whole working class, and I think that is what we're seeing at present. And the mass mobilization and the millions of people who came out in opposition, I think that suggests that there's going to be growing and ultimately overwhelming opposition to this. I just cite the example of the 1850s and the Fugitive Slave Act. This was a means of pursuing runaway slaves before the Civil War. It was meant to appease the Southern slavocracy, and bounty hunters and federal marshals were unloosed on cities across the North, breaking down doors, seizing people, deporting them back to slavery. And but within a couple of years, it had its opposite effect. Popular opinion in the North turned against the Fugitive Slave Act, and this became one of the major causes of the Civil War. Far from propping up slavery, the Fugitive Slave Act accelerated its destruction in the Civil War. As historians have often called it, the Second American Revolution.
Thank you, Tom. We have a question from the audience which relates to some of these issues, which I'll read, which either for you or other panelists to answer. The listener writes, in what way does the development of the mass political strike in the working class movement resemble and build upon the bourgeois democratic traditions found in the formation of civilian militias in the course of the American Revolution and the Civil War? In addition, what is the relationship between these processes and the development of the standing army, which plays such a large and progressive role in those earlier revolutionary periods, into a reactionary force for imperialism in the period after the Civil War? And what is its contemporary significance in the context of Trump's ongoing coup? A lot of historical questions raised in that one question, which could be, I'm sure, the subject of discussion over an extended period of time. But perhaps you'd like to speak to this, and just opening it up after you reply to the other panelists. First of all, if Will could speak. There have been a number of, there's other questions related to our conception of rank and file committees and how we're developing the movement for rank and file committees, what we mean by rank and file committees. In the demonstrations yesterday, many of those who were involved in intervening reported that there was a very strong response to the call for a general strike, which the World Socialist website has been raising. But also perhaps a limited understanding what is meant by that, or certainly what we are advancing in terms of the development of the IWA-RFC. So these are related questions. Perhaps first, Tom, you could speak on, again, more on the historical issues in response to that question, and then I'll ask Will to reply in reviewing our conception of rank and file committees, the IWA-RFC, and some of his own experiences.
That was a really big question. So I think it would probably take up too much of the remaining time we have to try to really answer in detail. But I mean, I think that one critical point in relationship to those democratic revolutions, the American Revolution, 1776, and the Civil War, is that they teach that established orders that have existed for forever. I mean, slavery existed forever. That they can end. I mean, as late as 1857, the Chicago Tribune wrote that no man living, quote unquote, will live to see the end of slavery. And within less than a decade, it had been swept away. I mean, I think that probably the more relevant history actually has to do with the 20th century, the experience of the Russian Revolution, and within the United States, the great traditions of the American working class. The workers' movement at one time was a very formidable opponent of American capitalism, and the mass strikes of the 1930s, 34 to 37. Jump to mind, and I think when we're talking about rank and file committees, and maybe Will can speak to this, we're trying to revive popular traditions that once existed among American workers. Concepts like an injury to one is an injury to all. The general strike, in which not just industries but whole cities would be shut down by workers. And I know that Will spends a lot of time speaking to workers about this, and maybe he can answer that question more effectively.
So just to add, I mean, in talking about rank and file committees compared to unionization, the unions base themselves entirely on a nationalist platform, one that succeeded for them in the past at a period after World War II, where Europe was entirely bombed out. Japan was hit with 2 nuclear weapons in addition to bombing, and it was the major productive force in the world. Now, the U.S. it has fallen in its economic capacity to China. I mean, in some aspects, China is more advanced than the U.S., and I think it's extremely important to note that, and also the struggles of the Chinese working class. But just that workers are viewing things more internationally in a period where previously they didn't. That there were periods in time in the economic boom of the U.S. where a nationalist argument could, while wrong, was winning among workers because there was no other economic power that rivaled the U.S. Now workers do sense that the understanding that the U.S. is not the only economy, that if they're going to win, the thoroughly internationalized production that they see in the factories and the plants, even in postal and packaging centers, that they see for themselves where these products are coming from. They see for themselves as a result of the COVID pandemic, where a shutdown in Taiwan can trigger a layoff in Detroit. So because of a lack of parts, they thoroughly see the internationalized nature of production now and understand that a struggle can't just be won in one plant. There are still thoroughly nationalist organizations guiding them. I mean, technically still in the political leadership. If it's the UAW, whether it's the UAW or the Teamsters or any of these other trade unions, they're still nationalist organizations, and it's not U.S. specific. There are trade unions in other countries that do the same thing, but workers understand when the political perspective is brought to them that we are an international class, and the only struggle that can win is an international struggle, and objectively, not just like a feeling of being a worker, but the reality of being a wage laborer is no different from being a wage laborer in any other country, and that wage laborers in other countries are not our enemy. And it's an easy argument to make to workers that this is the case, but it does need to be made more broadly. And in expanding that fight for that is what we're trying to do. So for those who aren't involved yet, who want to expand that work in the working class, I definitely recommend getting involved with the Socialist Equality Party, signing up on the WSWS. If you're a worker, signing up to be a part of a rank and file committee, and again, donating to the WSWS, and also in arming ourselves with the historical knowledge of what we're facing. That can be found on the Mehring website that Joe mentioned earlier, Mehring.com. Reading the lessons of history, being armed with the knowledge of what happened even in worker struggles in the past in the Soviet Union, the lessons learned from then that can be applied now, I think is extremely important. But just to say that in building the IWA-RFC, workers do recognize they're a part of an international class, that it's nothing but poison to them to just serve nationalist interests. Yeah, thank you for putting up. Anyway, we do need to arm ourselves with the lessons of history. And same thing with reading the website on a regular basis. The website is the only one that speaks to the interests of the working class. That's where we have the rank and file committee statements published. And I think it's extremely important that workers regularly read the website for any topic they're interested in.
Absolutely. Go to wsws.org now and read the World Socialist website. Will, there's a follow-up question from a member of the audience, Ned, who asks simply, where were the unions at the demonstrations yesterday? It's actually a question which came up with one of the young two young workers that we interviewed yesterday as well, who were raising that. Perhaps you could speak to that, and also perhaps specifically to the question of the UAW and Fein. You ran for president of the UAW against Fein on the program of transferring power to the rank and file, abolishing the bureaucracy. Can you speak to the role of the trade union apparatus presently and its significance?
Sure. I mean, to start, realistically, it could be asked, why don't we already have a general strike going on in the U.S.? Why aren't the trade unions leading any kind of mass movement against the Trump administration? With the amount of resources they have, And there's supposedly being workers' organizations. Why is it not the case that they're leading any kind of struggle against the Trump administration? And I would definitely say that it's not the sentiment among workers that they don't want to fight, that they don't want to strike or anything like that. But why are the bureaucratic apparatuses of all of these trade unions not doing that? The website points out why that's the case. It's not their orientation. They're fighting to keep their position as middle class people detached from work, basically parasites on the working class, and they're fighting to maintain that. They're fighting to maintain capitalism. They're not leading any kind of struggle. They're not going to lead any kind of struggle against the Trump administration. So I think it's extremely important to recognize that and understand that if there is going to be a fight that's led, it needs to be independent of those bureaucratic apparatuses. And that's what the IWARFC fights for. I'm not sure what the second part of that question was, but that's the first part of it. The unions aren't going to lead any kind of struggle. They already haven't. They've decided to abstain. And I think in studying that too, as well as what the unions did in when Hitler was coming to power, no fight being led there, what was their orientation as well? And it's not that the workers in the US don't want to fight now, it's that there's not a leadership to lead that other than the IWARFC.
The second part was just asking you to comment on Fain. I don't know if you have more to add. I mean, Sean Fain, the head of the UAW, was promoted, and he ran promoted by all sorts of pseudo-left organizations as a great reformer, then backed Biden, talking about the arsenal of democracy and supporting the expulsion of protesters against the genocide from UAW meetings, endorsing Biden, and is now lined up behind Trump. What's the sense among auto workers in relationship to the bureaucracy?
Well, I can definitely speak to my own plant. I mean, no one in Max supports Fain now. There were illusions in Fain based on him adopting kind of a line that sounded pseudo-left enough to sound like it was going to bring change to workers, but he sold us out, and workers largely understand that at Mac. And pretty much anyone who's been through a contract struggle with Fain at the head of understands that Fain is going to sell them out. I would also just say that early in Fain's campaigning, he identified himself as someone who supported someone like Bernie Sanders, someone who also postures as left and sells workers who are gravitating towards real leftist politics out back to the Democratic Party. So just to say that these are people that are posturing as someone who's going to promote change, but ultimately lead to dead ends. And just like with Fain, he did release a statement condemning basically the genocide in Gaza, but did led no action whatsoever to oppose it. And I would just say, with the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions calling for workers internationally not to handle arms and armaments or military equipment destined for Israel, it's important to study why the trade unions didn't do that, why they didn't respond in that way. There's a reason for that. It's outlined on the WSWS why that is, essentially their orientation, and why Fain responded the way that he did. So just to add that these ideas of reform that are still promoted within the trade unions, and it's in every trade union. Teamsters, Sean O'Brien was billed as a great reformer as well. But workers need to take these lessons of the idea of reform versus essentially revolution. The idea that these corrupt organizations are not going to represent the interests of the working class, that we need something different, that we need to establish an organization that's our own, that will advance our interests, independent of both capitalist political parties, independent of the trade union bureaucracies, and that's the IWARFC. So, just to sum it up there's a lot more to say, but that's where I'd sum it up.
Thank you very much, Will. Very important issues. I'd like to ask if David, you'd like to comment on the issues that have been raised. Oh, David, you're muted.
I think the Will has raised very critical questions that brings us really to the ultimately the political conclusions. First, I just want to stress again the significance of the demonstrations that were held yesterday, or which took place yesterday. They were an answer, an objective answer to the claim that there's no opposition, nobody will fight, it's impossible to mount resistance. That's just not the case. And those who persist in, who sort of make, pessimism and discouragement a way of life won't be able to meet the challenges of the time. I mean, back when I was fairly young, the old saying was, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. If you are, if you want to indulge in pessimism, you're not going to find a way forward. Pessimism is a very simplistic outlook. It's an evasion of a serious objective analysis of political problems and a solution. We are in revolutionary times. The revolution arises from the fact that all that we are witnessing is a breakdown of a social system, of an economic order, which is simply incompatible with the reality of mass society, the global development of the productive forces, the burning need to utilize the resources which are created by the collective global labor of the working class in a manner with the interests of humanity. At the same time, the national state system, the division of the world into increasingly irrelevant and destructive state entities which serve the interests of one or another segment of the ruling elites. This too is incompatible with the reality of global production. So we are in a revolutionary period. And this will and is already producing a change in the orientation of masses of people reflected in these demonstrations. But it is also a basic conception of Marxism that social being lags behind social consciousness. And the means by which consciousness is brought into alignment with reality, the means by which the working class acquires an understanding of its objective position, that requires the intervention of a conscious political force. That's the purpose of a political party. A political party, its responsibility is to develop a program which reflects objective reality and to fight for that program. Of course, that conception is opposed by all those who wish to subordinate or maintain the subordination of the working class to bourgeois parties, imperialist organizations, bourgeois ideology. No, our party fights to align the consciousness of workers and the broad mass of the world's population with the reality. Now, the objective conditions exist for achieving this. It is quite striking, again, to go back to the events yesterday. And I want to really make this point very forcefully, particularly to young people who are bombarded relentlessly with the claim that the major divisions in society are not those of class, but those of race, those of gender, those of sexual preference. Yesterday refuted all of that. Who saw banners which were centered on racial questions, gender questions? No. What predominated were socioeconomic issues, the fight against dictatorship, and an instinctive feeling which found expression in these demonstrations that there is a desperate need for the unity of all those who are opposed, the great mass of people who are opposed to the drive for dictatorship, social inequality, and the ever greater threat of war, thermonuclear war. I mean, we all know that one of the driving forces of radicalization among youth in the last period has been the outrage felt against genocide being committed against the masses of Gazans. a crime which must at this point be seen as the sort of defining imperialist crime of our new century. So, examining the situation as a whole, what we confront, we can draw, as you should, great encouragement from the presence of millions of people in opposition to Trump and the growing movement of mass opposition. But that imposes upon all of you tremendous responsibilities. What will you now do, and what must be done to direct that movement in a genuine revolutionary direction? That energy is not just frittered away. It's not just a question of another demonstration or a bigger demonstration, but to direct these demonstrations politically with a program which responds to the great social, economic, political problems of our time. How will we affect the unity of the working class within the United States and internationally? How will we stop the drive toward fascism? How will we stop the drive toward thermonuclear war? How will we construct, in other words, that necessary leadership within the working class, the great powerful force in modern society that can change the world? It is there. The decision has to be made to fight for socialism, to fight for a Marxist program, with the confidence that objective reality will cut a path to consciousness. A political party, the SEP, our comrades throughout the world, we are instruments for carrying that fight forward. And I think that those of you who have listened to what Will has had to say, who's directly involved in the union and fought, I just want to make the point, he's very modest, he hasn't made the point, that he ran for president as a socialist, and he received the votes of 5,000 auto workers. So much for the claim that workers will never support socialism. And the bureaucracy was so frightened that they made it their business not to inform the vast majority of auto workers that an election was taking place. Now, what we're describing here is a process which is taking place on a world scale. We are meeting in the most urgent situation. We have concentrated on the developments in the United States, but let's go back to where we started. The war which has now erupted between Israel and Iran. At this point, again, it should be clear, we are not dealing with isolated episodes, departures for something which is abnormal. As a matter of fact, barbarism is the normality of modern-day capitalism. If we just take the events which we've witnessed over the last several years, a pandemic that killed over 1 million Americans and 25 million or more internationally, and which still persists. What has been the response? The bringing forward of a maniac who is telling people that vaccinations is the problem, which is spreading the lie that the pandemic was the product of an experiment in a Chinese laboratory, something which everyone knows is not true. We have now seen the experience of expanding wars. These are being normalized. We're witnessing the growth of fascism in the politics of the ruling class. Fascism is being normalized. Now, our task is to normalize the struggle for socialism, for workers and young people to understand that they have to change the existing structure of society in the most profound way, to fight, to mobilize the working class as an independent political force, to break with the capitalist parties. In the United States, that means first and foremost to break with the Democratic Party and all of its apologists. Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez, all of these organizations which seek in one way or another to move all of protest back to its political graveyard, the Democratic Party. Make a fundamental change in your political orientation. Take up the fight for socialism. And that's why I urge you strongly, strongly to read the World Socialist website, to become active in the work of the Socialist Equality Party, for young people to become active in the work of our youth organization, the International Youth Institutes for Social Equality. And we say to all workers, if you are looking carefully at the dangers to the attack of democracy, you must organize yourself. You must make every factory, every neighborhood, every workplace a center of organized resistance, class-conscious resistance to the efforts of the ruling elite to impose upon us a dictatorship. So I hope that is the message that you'll take both from this meeting and from all the experiences through which we are presently passing.
Thank you, David. I think that was basically a very powerful conclusion to a, I think, very important discussion, which of course, could go on. I'm sure there's we got questions in. Joseph mentioned that, so we will continue this discussion, and I think obviously we will continue the coverage on the World Socialist website. We, as Comrade David just said, we are in the midst of historic events which require an answer, and I think we both assessed the situation very clearly in this discussion, but we also discussed and provided a perspective and the way and the path which has to be taken now. So with that, I want to thank all the panelists for their time, for their contributions. Again, I think these both elements I want to stress again. What we, I think, achieved with this discussion. First, really bring out the gravity of the situation we are facing: dictatorship, war. Trump is not acting just as an individual. He is speaking as a representative of a brutalized oligarchy, who is really, there are no limits. They have made a decision that they, if necessary, use the military to crush all opposition. But at the same time, and I think that was a very important point which came out of the discussion, the same contradictions within capitalism leading to dictatorship, war, fascism are also producing the other side, a powerful resistance in the working class, not only in the US with the latest demonstrations, but also internationally. That's something we said at the beginning of the year, actually, in our New Year's perspective, that there will be, in the coming month, a profound development of the class struggle, upheavals. That's exactly what we are witnessing. And we also stressed in the New Year's perspective, as we did today, and what Comrade David just centered on, the decisive question is, of course, revolutionary leadership, which is the IC, the International Committee of the Fourth International. We are the only tendency providing a socialist perspective, seeking to unify the international working class on a socialist basis in a struggle against capitalism, which is, of course, the root cause of war and dictatorship, and that has to be acted upon now. I think Comrade David put it also very well at the last May Day contribution, when he said it's not a point in speculating whether the working class is revolutionary and can topple capitalism. This has to be determined in struggle. And the history of the 20th century has, of course, shown that capitalism can be overthrown. That was taking place in Russia in 1917 in the October Revolution. Under the leadership of Lenin and Trotsky, the Bolshevik Party brought the working class, or the working class based on being guided and being won to a socialist perspective, was able to take power. So from this standpoint, I want to reiterate what Comrade David just said. I would like to call on all listeners to take action. Now it's really the time to make an important historical political decision. Join the struggle for revolution, for a socialist future, which is the only future. Become a member of the SEP, help to build a section of the ICFI in countries where we don't have sections yet. And of course, read the website on a daily basis, join the IWA RFC, and also support all our critical campaigns. I want to mention one very important fight we are waging for our comrade Bogdan Sirotyuk in Ukraine, a socialist opponent of the NATO war against Russia, but also a socialist opponent of the capitalist Putin regime in Russia. And he was arrested more than a year ago. He's now in prison for close to 14 months. And of course, this shows the real, when the imperialist powers, the Zelensky regime are talking about defending democracy, what a lie. They are arresting, of course, those who fight war, who fight for socialism. We have a page which was just shown on the screen where we gather signatures. Please join this important campaign. It's a central component in the fight against fascism, war, dictatorship, the fight for the freedom of Comrade Bogdan Sirotyuk. Of course, we need your financial support. Please make a very big donation. We have to bring this struggle forward. We need all your help. We need your involvement. With that, I want to hand it back one more time to Comrade Joseph, who will finally conclude the meeting.
Well, I think the comments by David and Johannes are summing up of this discussion, which has, I think, been very important. I would just make the point about Comrade Bogdan that his arrest now more than a year ago, in a sense, an initial onslaught in the escalating assault on democratic rights, arrested for opposing a war and fighting for the unity of workers in Russia, in Ukraine, and throughout the region on the basis of the independent interests of the working class against war and imperialism and all the capitalist governments. And for that, he was thrown into prison by the Zelensky government with the support of the Biden administration. And now you have students who are being seized for opposing the genocide in Gaza. You're being rounded up. This is an assault on democratic rights. It's inextricably connected to escalating global war and the rule of the oligarchy. And I think if conclusions have to be drawn from this meeting, it's those that have been stressed. I mean, the Trump administration is waging a massive assault on democratic rights, seeking to establish a presidential dictatorship, but this did not arise out of his head. It expresses the turn of the ruling class toward barbarism, criminality, genocide, dictatorship in the US and throughout the world. And it expresses the character of the capitalist oligarchy. And on the other hand, there is a powerful social force, as the speakers have stressed, the millions of people. I mean, that gives an expression to the mass opposition. And among workers, there is enormous anger. We'll then have a chance to reference one of the critical initiatives of the International Workers Alliance of Rank and File Committees, the fight for a workers' investigation into the death of Ronald Adams Sr., a auto worker who was crushed to death in April. And that has won a very powerful response in the working class and in the conditions in which workers are dying every day in the plants. These are the conditions that workers have to confront, the consequences of corporate exploitation, profit, the endless diversion of resources towards war and towards the bailout of the rich. There is a powerful social anger in the working class and a movement of opposition, but that has to be organized and it has to be politically directed. And that requires the development of a political leadership. Just to conclude, everyone sign up after this meeting, submit the form, join the Socialist Equality Party, make a donation, and make a decision to become involved. Thank you.